Griever here. This is a quick PSA about safety. Remember, when modifying a Nerf blaster or anything really, proper safety measures should always be taken, and kids, always ask your parents before using any tools or power tools. So be safe, happy modding, Nerf on.
What's up YouTube, Griever here, and we're going to be doing things a little different in this video. We're going to be starting off here on the workbench, and I'm actually doing a voiceover for this because it will just be easier. Going over the materials we will be needing, we will need some 1/2 inch CPVC. These are both cut to 6 inches in length and will be our barrels. You will need a keyring, your screwdrivers. This was part of the original idea where I was going to use a spring from a Tech 4 to add a little oomph to it. However, we're not using that, and we'll get to that later. Safety glasses, your Dremel along with either a grinding or drill bit, and the cutting wheel for plastics and a sanding drum. You will also need some Teflon tape or Plumbers tape. This can be optional, but we're using it. Some electrical tape, and that's going to be for the barrels, and again we'll get to that a little later. You will also need this. This is the crux of everything. This is a 3/4 to 1/2 inch CPVC coupler. I tend to use these a lot when I do mods on the Boomco Far Shot, and I thought it would work with this, and in a sense it will. So because the 3/4 will actually work well with connecting it to the blaster, and the 1/2 inch is obviously for the barrels. So this is where we're going to be connecting it to, so you're going to be losing a bit of the inner barrel, but that's fine. You will also need some epoxy, something to mix it with, and something to mix it on. So, and some silicone grease for the plunger once we're ready to put everything back together. So that is everything, and let's get into the actual blaster itself and start working on it. So here I've already opened up the blaster, and what you'll want to do is just take out the plunger rod with the catch and just put it aside because we're not working on that right now. And take out the trigger, and that's not really getting any kind of modifications. The main thing we're really going to be concerned about is this, and that is the plunger tube and the barrel assembly. Okay, so unlike the Night Finder where this would be all solvent welded together, or the Fire Strike where when you open up the blaster and just take it apart, everything just kind of falls to pieces, this is actually connected together in kind of like a little click and snap in position, which actually makes separating this thing very easy. So what you do is you just twist it apart, and you're able to remove everything all in one shot. So we can take out the spring for the air restrictor, and then the actual air restrictor itself, which I explained what an air restrictor is in the Retaliator video if you want to go check that out. But that is basically the Hotshock's air restrictor, and we can just toss this out because we don't really need it. Now, this white piece in here, or in the plunger tube, that was kind of like a plunger stop. We're actually going to be removing this because it's just going to add unnecessary dead space to the blaster itself. So we're not going to need that, so we're going to remove that, and you can toss that as well. Now, what we're going to do with the barrel assembly is we're going to remove the dart post, but we'll get to that after we cut down the barrel because it might be a little easier at that point. What we're going to do is we're going to take our Dremel with the plastic cutting wheel and cut along this little lip right here, and that's in between the bottom coupler and the textured barrel. So get our cutting wheel in position, make sure it's nice and tight, and don't forget your safety glasses because you don't want pieces of plastic flying into your eye. So again, we'll move that out of the way. Okay, so again, we're going to be making our cut right there, and you can see between the coupler that goes to the plunger assembly and the textured barrel, there's a small little lip right there. We're actually going to be cutting right above that. So you're not going to cut that lip off. That's actually going to be basically your guide for cutting. So here I've separated everything. So we have that lip, and actually we don't have to grind out the dart post because that just thankfully came out. Now don't throw this piece out because we're going to want to keep the tip of that for aesthetic purposes, so and we'll get to that later. Now there will be some grinded plastic that's still on where we cut. You're just going to want to clean that off with either the sanding drum, or you can pick it off as well. Just be very careful with it because the stuff can get hot and you might burn your fingers a little bit. So just always be careful with this stuff. So I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. And there we go. So now we just have to get just put the plunger aside. We just have to get the coupler now, and we will start fitting it in. And actually I misplaced it and I have to go looking for it. So now we have that. But I did make a discovery while trying to fit this on. See that outer ring that we left, or I should say, yeah, that outer lip that we left is actually the exact same diameter as our 3/4 inch coupler. So what I did was, instead I took my sanding drum and I actually reamed out the inside of that a little bit more, like right along the edge here, just big enough to fit our coupler through it. So now instead of the coupler sitting on the outside of the plunger assembly, it's actually going to sit on the inside of the plunger assembly, and will also act as kind of like the plunger stop that we had already removed. So that works out actually very much in our favor. So all we have to do now is just mix up our epoxy and fit everything into place. So you also want to make sure you do wipe down the area of any kind of like lubricant that was already there, just so this way the epoxy isn't like grabbing onto stuff that isn't really there. Also, we will be putting some epoxy along this ridge here, so that when we do connect it, everything's going to be it's going to just be one solid piece. Definitely make sure we're not going to have any breakages. Okay, so let's mix up the epoxy now, and this way we can get everything all started on that. So here we have our JB Weld epoxy. This is 5-minute set epoxy, so after 5 minutes this does set, and you can kind of use it, but I usually like to set things or let it just cure overnight. Now this is a 2-part epoxy, and you will see one side is clear and the other has kind of a yellowish tinge to it. I know it's not showing up that great on this camera, but I apologize about that, but trust me, it is 2-part. You can kind of see the difference in it. And make sure you put your cap back on so nothing gets all dried out. And then all we got to do is just start mixing it together. Once it starts mixing, you'll see it turn to this like pearlescent opaque color, and that just basically means it's all mixing and ready for use. So a little bit more mixing and get a good amount on the stick, and then just start applying it to the ridge here on the coupler, because this way we'll sit this right into the part that connects to the plunger, and all of that will be all internalized. And set it and just push it in, make sure it is all a nice fit, it's not going anywhere, and just maybe give it a minute or so, and then you can definitely it should be like set for it. Now normally I would say let it sit for 5 minutes, but because I'm doing the video, we're doing everything kind of in one shot. Once that's set, if you have enough left over, or if you want to just do it right after that, get some epoxy, put it on the ridge here where that front cap connects back onto the plunger tube. Now you can be neat about this, I'm being very sloppy about it, but it's fine as long as you get like a decent amount on there, because once you connect it, and any epoxy that does bleed out, you can always just wipe off with a paper towel. So that's all set now. Wipe it off with a paper towel. And you definitely want to do that obviously before it dries, because once it dries it's going to be solid and you'd have to grind it off. So that is all set. We're actually going to let this sit overnight, and we're going to work on the plunger assembly next. So I'm going to we're going to nip the tips off of the bar down there. We're going to leave the catch spring as is, and I will explain again later on in regards to that why we're going to, because unfortunately we're not going to be double springing that, but I'll explain why in a moment. Alright, so this is actually the next day. The epoxy is fully cured and it's solid as a rock. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the edges of the plunger the plunger rod itself off. This is where we would be priming it, but we're going to be making the keyring mod. So we need to take those tips off, plus it's the way we can get the spring and the catch out so that we can do replacements at a later time. And you just want to really go right along the edge of where the grip meets the plunger rod, and don't forget your safety glasses. So alright, that piece is off now, and again just be very careful with that, because that actually was very hot. That piece was a little hot, and this is mostly clean, so you don't have to worry about grinding it. But if it's excessively got a lot of debris on there and you want to do a grind on it, then that's totally fine. So just remember, always be careful when using your Dremel, especially when you're like me and you're cutting towards yourself, which is a big no-no. And that piece is off, and again just pull the flashing off, that's fine, and I'm happy with it. It's clean. Take the catch off, take the spring out. Now what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to switch over to either your grinding bit or your drill bit. I misplaced my grinding bit from the night before, so we're going with a very thin drill bit. Now one thing you definitely want to do is you want to make sure that the drill bit is at least the same size as the keyring. You don't want to go bigger than it, definitely, because it might make the hole too big or make it too weak there. As long as the bit can fit into that hole with the keyring that I'm using, is actually totally fine. So, and this is actually a dull bit, which is why it's taken me forever to actually get through that. So we have the hole for our keyring, and that is all set, so we can attach this later on, no problem whatsoever. Now we're going to, sorry, I realize I explained that if it is a tight fit, it's going to keep the keyring from bouncing around and all that stuff, and that's totally fine, because this way you'll either keep the keyring straight, or if you push it back down, it's not going to go flying over you. We're doing the Teflon tape around the O-ring. I explained this one, we did this kind of in the Retaliator video as well, but we're just going to be doing a few wraps. I do 2 or 3 here. I did a test fit and it was still kind of loose, so we actually did a few more of the wraps. So we have about like 3 or 4 wraps on there in total. And then I did the test fit at that point, and then that's when I realized I could use a little bit more. So to help with the seal, I put on a few more wraps of the Teflon tape. And again, this isn't like this isn't going to damage anything. This will be totally fine. So I do like 2 or 3 more wraps of E-tape, or not E-tape, of the Plumbers tape, and we get a nice decent suction on the on the plunger head, so that's good. We don't need those bits. It's awesome. So the plunger is totally cured now. We let it sit overnight. It's ready to go. Now we're going to go into the final steps of assembly in a moment. What we're going to do now is we're going to do the final bit of cutting, and that is for the tip that's going to go into the front of the Hotshock. This is why I wanted to keep this part of the barrel, because it's just going to make things a whole lot easier. So get your cutting wheel for plastic again, and we're just going to go right along the back side, or just past where those connector pieces are that actually hold the barrel in the blaster itself. We don't need the whole barrel because we have the coupler, but I want to keep this just as kind of like a little so you have the orange tip, but also it helps keep the barrel in place as well. Now unfortunately my cut was sloppy as anything, so I'm just trying to grind off and make it look a little neater and even and get rid of the flashing. So that is all said and done. Now this was my original plan for this. We were going to do a double spring on this, with the Tech 4 spring actually fitting perfectly under the Hotshock spring, but we did have to kind of screw it into place onto the plunger tube because it couldn't get to where it catches. Now, we're not actually going to go through with that, and I will explain that later on. This part is just showing you how to actually attach the keyring. I wanted to do it not connected to the blaster just because it will make it a little easier to show you how to do it. Just get a flathead screwdriver, slide it in between the two rings, and once it's in between, just turn sideways so you get a nice big gap. And once you get that in, just slide it into the hole, and boom, there you go. Now, at this point, we would go into our final assembly, and I realized I did leave the catch off of it, but I take the keyring off later on. We have the barrels, and that's going to be for our speed loader, but that we will build after we reassemble everything all together. Okay, so you'll notice something is missing obviously from here, and that is the addition of the second spring is no longer now on the plunger rod. Reason being is because it was actually preventing us from priming the blaster completely. Threading it on actually put it right next to the actual catch that's on the plunger rod, and that was actually preventing it because when it compressed, it actually wouldn't allow the catch to go through. So there may be some kind of aftermarket springs we can use for it, but right now we're just going to be using the stock spring. And the stock spring was designed to fire mega darts, so firing a smaller dart out of a tighter fitting barrel will actually work totally fine, at least for now. So here I'm going to show you how the actual catch works. So we have the plunger, and we have the plunger rod here. It sits into the blaster as so. Now when the little slot right next to where the spring is where your catch goes. So the spring has to fit into that spot. I figured you can do a little bigger because of the way it is, but it then has to clear so that can actually catch. So you actually need something that would go over and fit like this spring rather than what we were trying to do. So therein lied that problem. But on the plus side is we can also now put the catch back on, fit that into place, and put everything all back together.
Okay, so our Mega Hotshock is now all completed. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a really quick speed loader. And what that is the CPVC pipe that we had earlier. This is going to be your barrel, but rather than having to reload one barrel at a time, what we're going to do is we're going to take the second barrel, we're going to attach it right here. Now sometimes people will use super glue or epoxy or hot glue. I'm actually just going to use electrical tape because if you do it tight enough, believe me, it will not go anywhere. So you just want to mark off, so I have a little Sharpie right here, where the end of the barrel is going to go, because you obviously don't want to go too far in, because you will then be blocking here or it won't sit properly. So you want it a little back here, so that's about where we're going to go. So take the barrel out, get your electrical tape, and go to town. Now, you definitely want to do it tight so that it doesn't really go anywhere. Normally, a bead of hot glue here and here would keep it from moving a lot more, but this is just a super quick one so that we can demonstrate how a speed loader kind of works in a moment. So, I think that should be more than enough. Alright, we have our speed loader, we have our modded Hotshock, and that's it. So now we're going to do a quick firing demo, and you'll see my wonderful face finally. Alright, so we have our completed Hotshock here. We have our speed loader built. Excuse me. We have our speed loader built. We have our CPVC coupler seated into the barrel system. And we have our keyring here to make priming this a whole lot easier. Now, to load the speed loader, it's very, very simple. You just take a dart. This is what is called a Stefan or a slug dart. This is 1/2-inch foam backer rod with a small little washer in the tip with some hot glue and a felt pad. We will do a dart making tutorial later on, probably when it gets a little warmer. You just put it into the barrel, and that's going to go into the coupler. Now, I do have some white foam here as well. White foam usually doesn't work too well with CPVC, but I'm going to give it a shot anyway. And whenever you're using a coupler and a speed loader, you always want to make sure you are primed first before loading in the barrel with the dart. Because if you don't, and you do it where you put this in and then prime it, you run the risk of vacuum loading your blaster. And what that is, it's sucking the dart out of the barrel into your plunger tube, and that just makes for a bad time. So we have the gray foam here, which works very well with CPVC. Oh, that was a nice shot. Here we have the white foam, which doesn't work well with CPVC, but it works well with everything else I have. And that just went. But I have more gray foam here. You always want to try and get barreling material that works with the darts that you have. Oh, and another good thing with CPVC, depending on the type or the inner barrel you have, it will nestle a elite dart very, very well. So we'll prime. We'll fire the gray foam first. Oh, beautiful. And here's the elite dart. Oh, that was nice. Alright, well, that's everything for this mod. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Back to Basics. If you like this series and like this video, throw me a like, consider subscribing to the channel. If you have any thoughts on what I can do for future episodes of Back to Basics, please leave it down in a comment below. I'll definitely take it in consideration, and I do reply to every comment that I do get, or at least I try my damnedest to do so. And I do want to say thank you very much for the tip on a replacement camera to Dragon Mods. I did look into that one that you had suggested. I think I am going to be getting it. So hopefully in the very near future, we will be getting better video quality finally on this channel. Hey, it only took me 5 years. So, again, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Later.